Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a massive intellectual journey. We're going deep into Hajj, the annual Islamic pilgrimage. And I have to say, this is one of the most logistically and theologically complex topics we've ever covered.
It really is. And the sources you sent over, I mean, they're challenging. We're looking at over 50 critical questions.
Yeah.
These aren't just, simple historical inquiries. They're deeply skeptical critiques on everything from history and ethics to multi-billion-dollar economics.
And that's exactly our mission today. We want to tackle these common skeptical questions head on and then synthesize the really detailed and diverse scholarly defenses we found. We're drawing on centuries of thought here.
We are. Everything from classical masters like Al-Ghazali all the way to modern and even progressive voices like Al-Qaradawi and Khaled Abu el-Fadl.
So we're getting Sunni, Shia, modern reformist perspectives, the whole spectrum.
Exactly. And at its core, this whole deep dive really explores that fundamental tension, the tension between, on one hand, a divine command, ritual obedience, and on the other, the messy, pragmatic challenges of human organization and modern ethics.
Okay, so let's unpack that. I think we should start with the most visible critiques, the physical acts themselves. This is where a lot of people get stuck.
It is. The skeptic's query usually starts here. How can an all-powerful, formless God require humans to, circle an empty cube or kiss a stone? Especially when Islam's absolute core principle is condemning idol worship, or shirk.
Right. It just seems like a huge contradiction on the surface. If God is everywhere, why focus on a building?
Well, classical scholars like Al-Ghazali spend a lot of time on this. They frame these rituals not as something God needs, God is transcendent, needs nothing, but as profound tests of our own humility, of our discipline. It's about total submission.
So the circular motion, the tawaf, what does that symbolize?
It's meant to symbolize the orbiting of all creation around a single divine center. It fosters this deep sense of cosmic unity.
So it's internal spiritual training, not some kind of external validation for God.
Precisely. The physical act forces the ego to comply. I mean, think about it. It's hard to be arrogant when you're just one person in a massive, swirling crowd, all doing the same demanding physical act. It's a collective humbling.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the black stone? Kissing or touching it, to an outsider, that looks undeniably like veneration of an object.
And this is where a really crucial theological firewall gets put up. Scholars always cite the statement from the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab.
What did he say?
As he approached the stone, he said very publicly, "I know you are just a stone that can neither harm nor benefit. If I hadn't seen the prophet kiss you, I wouldn't do it."
Wow. That's an incredibly powerful statement. It totally reframes the act.
It completely redirects the meaning. It makes it clear that the act isn't worship of the object. It's purely an act of obedience, following the prophet's specific example. It's sunnah, not idolatry.
And the Kaaba itself being empty.
That's the whole point. Its emptiness is intentional.
Yeah.
It signifies God is not contained in space or matter. It's just a geographical focal point, the Qibla, to unite a billion people in prayer. A spiritual address, if you will.
Okay, let's turn to the history, because this is where the skeptical questions get even deeper. A lot of the core rituals, the circling, the running, the stoning of the pillars, they all clearly predate Islam. They were part of pagan Arabian worship. So why did Muhammad keep them?
This is the historical heavy artillery, for sure. And the scholarly defense is just as robust. The argument is one of restoration, not copying.
Restoration.
Yes. The argument is that Islam didn't borrow from paganism. It reclaimed the original monotheistic rites that came from Abraham, rites that had simply been corrupted over the centuries.
So the idea is that the pre-Islamic practices weren't original, but were just polluted versions of something much older and purer.
That is the core theological claim. Muhammad's role, what's known as the Tawhid Project, was to purify the site. He got rid of the idols, those are the innovations, but restored the ancient forms. It's about continuity with that original, pure monotheism.
Let's talk about one of those forms, the stoning of the devil, the Jamarat. You're throwing pebbles at a pillar. It doesn't physically contain Satan. What's going on there?
Right, it's not literal combat. Scholars explain it as a commemoration of Abraham's rejection of Satan's temptations. It's a symbolic act, a psychodrama.
A psychodrama.
You are symbolically stoning your own evil influences, your ego, your temptations. The external action is just there to reinforce that internal commitment.
That reframing makes the rituals feel less like arbitrary rules and more like, choreographed historical memory for self-improvement.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's move from theology to the complex realities of today, the socio-economic critiques. The first one is a big one, the barrier of cost. How can a merciful God require a pilgrimage so expensive that many sincere but poor Muslims can never afford it? It seems to create a spiritual class system.
This is probably the easiest theological question to answer because the text is so explicit. The answer is the istita exemption.
Which means?
The obligation to perform Hajj is strictly conditional upon istita, which means having the physical and the financial ability. The Quran is very clear on this.
So just to be clear, if you're poor or old or disabled, the obligation it doesn't exist for you. There's no sin.
No sin at all. No spiritual deficit. Scholars stress that the sincere intention, the niyyah of the poor person who wishes they could go, is rewarded equally. And many modern scholars use this principle to critique wealthy people who perform Hajj over and over again as a status symbol.
That's a fascinating internal critique. So they're saying that wealth should be used differently.
Yes. Many argue that doing a second or third optional Hajj goes against the whole egalitarian spirit. They'll say that sponsoring a poor Muslim's first Hajj is far more spiritually meritorious.
Which connects directly to this next massive critique, the political economy of it all. Hajj is a multi-billion-dollar industry enriching Saudi Arabia. Isn't its spiritual purpose tainted by things like poor labor conditions or the destruction of heritage sites?
This is where the internal critique from modern scholars becomes really, really fierce. They acknowledge that, yes, the logistics require huge management, but voices like Khaled Abu al-Fadl are very critical of the excessive commercialization and also the use of Hajj as a political tool. Denying visas to pilgrims from countries you have a diplomatic issue with.
I've also seen calls for international oversight. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. The argument is that since Mecca is sacred to all Muslims, its management shouldn't be monopolized by one government. Some scholars call for an international Muslim body to manage the finances and administration to make it more transparent.
And what about the ethics of the construction? The migrant worker issue?
Scholars are explicit on this. They condemn it. They argue that performing a sacred ritual in a luxury hotel built through unjust labor practices is, it's spiritual hypocrisy. Islam demands just compensation for labor. To worship in a space built on injustice taints the whole experience.
So the burden is on the pilgrim too. You can't achieve ritual purity if you're ignoring social justice right in front of you.
Exactly. And that's linked to the demolition of historical sites. Critics say over 90% of ancient sites, like the homes of the Prophet's companions, have been razed for malls and hotels.
What's the defense for that? How can you defend destroying your own history?
The defense, and this is often a Salafi view, is that these sites could attract veneration, that people might start making pilgrimages to them, which could lead to shirk, to idolatry. So demolition is framed as a way to protect the purity of the faith.
But critics just see it as prioritizing profit over heritage. A huge conflict.
A major unresolved conflict.
Let's shift now to the dangers of it all. The harsh realities of safety, disasters. People ask, if Hajj is divinely commanded, why doesn't God's providence prevent horrible disasters like stampedes or mass heat stroke?
This gets into a core theological concept called sunnatullah, which means the natural laws. Islamic teaching holds that the physical world operates by fixed laws. Physics, biology, crowd dynamics. God commands us to act responsibly within those laws.
So a tragedy like the 2015 stampede, that's not seen as a failure of divine protection.
No. Scholars would argue that is a failure of human management. Poor crowd control, bad design, negligence. These are the consequences of human agency, not a lack of divine oversight.
So the solution isn't to pray for a miracle to stop a stampede, but to engineer better crowd flow to prevent it.
Precisely. Scholars like Al-Qaradawi stress that God commands us to ensure safety. The tragedies are a failure of human accountability. So for them, continuous reform of logistics is actually a spiritual duty. It honors the sanctity of life.
Okay, another tough logistical question. The mass animal sacrifice. Critics point to millions of animals being slaughtered, and in the past, huge problems with waste and the environment.
The sacrifice itself is symbolic. It commemorates Abraham's submission, and its entire purpose is tied to charity. The Quran is explicit. The meat must be given to the poor.
But the waste, historically, must have been just staggering.
It was a massive problem. But this is where modern logistics offers one of the most compelling defenses. There are now huge Saudi-led projects, like the Project for Utilization of Sacrificial Meat. They use industrial-scale slaughterhouses, freezing, canning.
And what do they do with all that meat?
They ship it. It's frozen, and sent to famine-stricken regions all over the world in Africa and Asia. It's effectively transformed the ritual from a local event with potential waste into a massive global food aid program.
That is a genuinely profound evolution of a ritual.
It is. And on top of that, you're now seeing scholars advocating for green Hajj initiatives. They argue environmental stewardship, or Khalifa, is an Islamic duty. So they're pushing to reform logistics to reduce the carbon footprint and waste.
Okay, let's tackle our final section. Exclusivity and personal transformation. This is a sensitive one. If Islam is a universal religion, why are non-Muslims strictly forbidden from even entering the city of Mecca?
This really comes down to the concept of the haram, the sacred sanctuary. The restriction is based on a verse in the Quran, and the reasoning is about preserving the site's ritual purity and sanctity.
What does that mean, though, ritual purity?
Scholars describe it as a restricted inner sanctum, a space dedicated exclusively to one specific form of worship. The goal is to prevent any potential desecration and to maintain an atmosphere that is focused purely on the rites of Hajj.
So the argument is the message of Islam is universal and available everywhere, but the physical space for its central rite is restricted for focus.
Exactly. The barrier is religious and ritualistic, not ethnic or national. It doesn't negate the universal call of the faith itself.
All right, final question, and it's more personal, more psychological. Why do millions perform identical rituals? Doesn't that stifle individuality? And if Hajj erases your sins, why do some people come back feeling unchanged or even more skeptical?
Well, the uniformity is actually a core part of its defense. Think of the ihram, the simple white cloths that all the men wear. It completely strips away all signs of class, wealth, nationality. It's the ultimate visual expression of equality before God.
It's equality by mandate.
The unity is external, but the sincerity, the niyat, that's intensely personal. That's in your heart. So you have infinite room for personal spiritual depth within that collective uniform act.
And what about the transformation? Or the lack of it?
This is key. Scholars will always say, Hajj is a tool, not a magic wand. Yes, the act can clear the slate of past sins. But the transformation isn't automatic. Its effectiveness depends entirely on the pilgrim's sincerity during the rites, and this is crucial, their continued moral commitment after they go home.
So the work really begins when you leave.
That's when the real test starts.
We've covered a huge amount of ground here, from a single stone to global logistics. The main takeaway for me is this constant tension between symbolic obedience, that Abrahamic restoration story, and the very human, very messy logistical and economic challenges of putting that command into practice today.
I think that's right. And the most compelling scholarly defenses are the ones that acknowledge the human failures, they acknowledge the stampedes, the labor issues, the commercialization, but they maintain that the spiritual essence of the ritual, the divine command, remains valid. The very existence of this intense internal debate shows a real commitment to critical thinking within the faith.
That commitment to self-critique is what makes it all so compelling.
And this leaves a final question, a provocative one for you, the listener, to think about. The pilgrimage, as we said, is conditional on ability, on istita. But given the massive multi-billion-dollar economy that the event generates and concentrates, does the continued existence of this severe economic barrier for so many represent an unavoidable feature of the divine command? Or is it instead a profound failure of human charity and organization?
A question that links ritual purity directly to social justice. A deep dive indeed. Thank you for joining us.